And good morning, dearest friends. Thursday, March 1st, the 28th. I'm sorry, Tuesday. I got the date right. 1st of March. And it is the 28th of Adar Rishon, Koyach, Adar Rishon. And so we ask Hashem to give Koyach and optimism to the dear members of the Chabura, their households, Chol Asher Lahem, and of course, our prayerful wishes for our brothers and sisters and all innocent folks that are currently in great distress in Ukraine. And I want to also mention, dear friends, Leah Basrita, Malka Bas, Rivka, for complete, speedy, and total recovery and health, and as well for all the dear folks on this Chabura and their households. We're going to continue. We're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. Just to give you a fast recap. We are studying Masechah Shabbos, chapter 13, the Bar Mitzvah chapter, page Kufay Amud Beis, that's 105b. And today, with Hashem's help, we'll turn to page 106. We are well in past this. We're deep 2/3 into Masechah Shabbos, which is wonderful. A lot of ground and accomplished. We're talking now about a few malachas in the Mishnah, but we focus now, namely, on a person that is doing destruction. Korea. He's tearing clothing or other things up. Why would a person do that? So this Mishnah mentions two possibilities, either out of anger or out of distress, being distraught, either mournfully or angrily. Of course, as mentioned yesterday, it's generally better to rein one's feelings and emotions. If a person has to, the doctor says better to do it if you have to break something, break your own stuff. You'll avoid jail time and you'll preserve your friendships, most of them anyways. And so it's good advice. And the Gemara spent its time reviewing a contradiction in a Mishnah and a Brisa pertaining to tearing out of mourning, out of grief for the loss of a loved one. The Mishnah says if you tear for the loss of a loved one, patur. I'm sorry, it doesn't. It says if you tear for a deceased, for a departed person, patur. A Brisa says you tear for a departed person, chayav. And so the question is, it's an outright contradiction. So the Gemara went through a lengthy process of explaining how there are scenarios where one is Jewishly, halachically mandated to do kriya. It is a warranted behavior. And then certainly it is constructive. They're discharging a mitzvah, a Jewish practice, and therefore they would be chayav, because to do something that is destructive, tearing, but it's for a productive purpose, the observance of a mitzvah, or as we'll see in a moment, another elaboration where a person is allowing themselves to go through the emotions, and that could be cathartic and healing, but we'll talk about that more in a moment. And there are exceptions. A person is chayiv to tear for a relative that is a close relative, and a Talmid Chacham, and an Adam Kasher, or a decent person, a righteous person, and if they are, God forbid, in the presence of the person at the time of departure, all of those, one would be chayiv because they are mandated kriyas. They're tearings that are halachically, Jewishly necessary. However,
you want to get it, Maddie?
No, honor a barrel.
Rabbi,
Yes.
what exactly, Fiatamita, turning up the bed, exactly what is done? Do you know what I'm talking about when I say Fiatamita?
I'm sorry. Say go again.
Fiatamita, Kaf Pe Yud Taf. It's one of the
Yes. It's one of the it's one of the practices.
It's one of the upturning of standing up the bed.
Doctor, did we see that?
Today.
Hold on. Did we see that in our Gemara?
No,
okay.
I don't know.
So let's we're going to come to it, but let's put it on the side for now, if you don't mind. It's a good question. Okay. In general, it seems like in the realm of mourning, practices of mourning, there are certain hanhagot that we've held on very strongly, and there are other things that there's been a good bit of evolution or development since the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara. So, but I want to stick to what we're talking about, just because I don't want to expose my ignorance. So back to our question. So basically, if a person is mandated to tear, they're chayiv. But if they're otherwise tearing, a friend, an associate, okay. then they would not be chayiv for tearing because they have not discharged a obligation. The Gemara then proceeds to ask a very important question. It was a question that was on all of our minds. The whole discussion about tearing chayiv, tearing pater, all makes sense. And this was Dr. Hammer's explanation initially. That all makes sense when it comes to mourning, the loss of a loved one, where there's a mitzvah involved. But to our knowledge, there is no mitzvah to tear something out of anger. And therefore, how do we explain away, or how do we make sense of a clear dispute, a clear machloikes, a clear contradiction between a Mishnah and a Brisa? And generally speaking, we would like as much as possible to make order and to make sense and to limit machlokiyut. So it is easier to say that it's a machloket, it's two different sages of the Mishnah. And that is a valid answer. However, generally speaking, if we can give a more rational, verstandike, understood explanation, that is a preference. And it is for that reason that the Gemara embraces Dr. Hammer's proposal before giving the second proposal, which is about anger. So at this point, the Gemara says, you know what? We cannot apply any of these distinctions as it pertains to anger. Therefore, we must conclude and revert back to another common way to understand a apparent contradiction in the Mishnah or the Mishnaic traditions, namely Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda have a famous, renowned, frequently appearing debate about melacha, she'ena, tzricha, legufa. You're doing the melacha, but you actually don't intend for the conventional common effect. You have another strange, different, alternate reason for doing it, but it's not the primary use. Or maybe you actually don't desire the byproduct at all. So all variations of that. How would that explain our dispute? Simple. Tearing out of anger is not the typical reason for breaking. Ruining, destroying, typically is done to be constructive. Atypically, although not unheard of, it is done also out of anger. Is that considered the purpose of tearing? No, the purpose of tearing is to facilitate repair. The purpose of breaking is to facilitate building and construction. As we said yesterday, you'll never find a demolition company, who is tasked with doing demolition to help you vent your frustration. Although with the caveat that today with the rage rooms and these things, maybe we'd have to reconsider that. But at least until the modern age, there was not a formal industry, and it wasn't a primary thing to do to break and to tear and to ruin items. The Gemara, we're still in the middle of that process, and that's where we're going to pick up today. I hope I did a fair job recapping yesterday's Gemara, and now let us hop in. If anyone has any brief comments related to what I said or preparing for the next Gemara, please feel free to chime in. And if you're muted, please hit unmute so that we can hear your voice. All right. Again, always welcome to chime in. The Gemara continues. I'll just show you the last two lines of it. Har Rabbi Yehuda, Har Rabbi Shimon. The contradictory texts each express the viewpoint of a different rabbi. The Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar Malacha Sheina Tzrich Leguf, although your purpose is not for the common effect, you're still chayiv. So chayiv aleha. Therefore, when you tear your chayiv, that's the Brisa. Har Rabbi Shimon, our Mishnah would be an expression of the viewpoint of Rabbi Shimon. The Amar Malacha Shein Tzrich Legufa Patra leha. Rabbi Shimon says, so long as you're not doing the malacha for the primary common purpose, you are patur. Again, the literal translation, it is not needed for its own sake. Amor, the Gemara says, hold on a second. Time out. Let's think this through. The Gemara says, we know Rabbi Yehuda. We know his viewpoint. We know Rabbi Shimon. And there's a reason why we didn't immediately default to this explanation. We have to understand how far Rabbi Yehuda is willing to make a person chayiv. Amor de Shabbas Ch Rabbi Yehuda. When would we say that Rabbi Yehuda says you're chayiv for doing an act, even if it is not the primary purpose for that act? That's bimisaken if it is constructive. So usually, I'm trying to think of a good example. But any malacha, usually you do the malacha for X. Today you're doing the same act, but for a different byproduct, but it's always misakin. It's always constructive to achieve, to accomplish, to gain something, to build something, to have something creative. However, would you think Rabbi Yehuda is going to say you're chayiv if the whole thing you're doing is not just not the primary purpose, it is destructive, it's counterproductive? How could Rabbi Yehuda say you're chayiv? How could the Brisa say you're chayiv? You're tearing something. You're going to be very upset you tore that thing in 20 seconds, a minute, an hour. Interview a person that's ever gone into a rage and done a lot of damage, especially if it's their own items or it's someone that's their friend or family. The amount of regret, remorse, and the cost of repair usually leads a person to feel extreme regret in no time. That's not productive. That's not constructive. It's destructive. It's negative. You're going to feel terrible about it. Hopefully, if you're not a psychopath and then you have bigger problems, you're going to feel terrible. So the Gemara answers a beautiful answer. And we kind of mentioned this earlier, but it's going to be nice to see it in the Gemara. Rabbi Oven. Rabbi Oven explains. Hi, Nami Misakinu. An angry person breaking something is being constructive. Now, you're not actually building something, but you know what you're doing? The ka'avid nachas ruach leyitzro. He is allowing his instinct, he's allowing his yetzer to be at peace. Let's see how Rabbi Steindorf translates this. He is assuaging his anger. He's calming himself down. And as the doctor wisely said, a person needs to be calm. A person would do well to calm themselves down, because the longer they hold it in, they might do things that are even more destructive or damaging to relationships. So again, the ka'avid nachas ruach liyitzrai, he is doing something to calm down his anger. Rashi shemeshachech et chamato. Anyone here is familiar with the Megillah? This is a word that you may recognize from the Megillah. Chamat hamelech shachacha. His anger was, give me the right word. Dr. Hammer, you're muted, but
Diminished.
Diminished, but it's more than diminished. His anger was, your doctor, we still don't hear you, but
Abated.
Abated. His anger abated, but we're talking about an emotional wind down. His anger has winded down. There's a better word for it. I suspected.
Rabbi.
Hold on.
Dissipated.
Dissipate. Okay. Shkoyach. Reb Errol?
There's another angle to all this. Sometimes that anger and that outburst is a teaching moment, because the reason that anger was caused, people might not be aware that that is something that would make him angry.
I hear you. I'll tell you this. The Rambam, Maimonides, says that a parent or a person who is charged with chinuch needs to occasionally show panim zoafot, a angry countenance. But he says, and this is easier said than done, a person needs to wield strictness, anger, but not when they're feeling angry. You have to allow yourself to not be angry and then put on a show. Let your children see how displeased you are, how angry you are, because this is such a not good thing they did. But you never want to be actually acting out of anger. Again,
I wasn't recommending it, God forbid.
So, but it's an ideal that I suppose we can aspire to live up to. I think this is one of the virtues they say before responding or screaming: count to certain numbers or take a certain amount of breaths. Allow yourself to calm down a little bit, to be more in control. Usually you'll be more effective, and also you won't do something that you strongly regret.
So, Rabbi, if
hold on one second. There is a very wise comment here in the comments. Someone says that if they are seeking to find ways to deal with anger, I'm not making this promise, but this individual graciously posted it. He says, you might want to consider joining us on Wednesday nights for our meditation from Sinai course. You may find some of the ideas there will also be helpful. So thank you, Ellie, for sharing that. All right. Alan, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, okay.
Does this mean that if I'm an angry person, there's a lot of people who are angry all the time? And if something really riles me up, that I could take a rock and throw it through a window
Not
to calm my
advisable.
anger?
Not at all advisable. You can take a rock and throw it through your own window.
Right.
But that's also not advisable. Your wife's going to be very disappointed. And you'll have to deal with her anger then. So you have to decide.
Rabbi,
Professor, please.
I guess we're introducing here a new concept that creating emotions or changing the emotion is a constructive malacha. And if you take it further, that means that creating an emotion of happiness is also constructive and should be done on Shabbos. On the other hand, it's
Professor, can I summarize your
everything.
question? I believe what the professor is saying is, if we understand this correctly, a person should always be in a foul mood on Shabbos, because the creation of a positive mood could be considered constructive and thus prohibited on Shabbos. It's a good question. It's a good question because it allows us to clarify. I don't think the Gemara is considering things that create a positive mood to be construction. The Gemara is saying milachot that are not done for their primary effect, but they are soothing, can also be considered a melacha. So, for example, writing, but not for the purpose of writing something, for soothing. I'm just making this up. Maybe according to Rabbi Yehuda, because it's therapeutic, or drawing or whatever, maybe that would be considered a melacha. Or hammering nails, again, don't ask me where that's bona, but doing it not for the purpose of actually keeping a structure, but because for you it's very cathartic and therapeutic, that might, according to Rabbi Yehuda, be prohibited, because ultimately, although you're not doing the malacha for its intended purpose, it's not considered destructive. I should say, I think really the only and best instance that's going to touch upon this idea are going to be those malachas that are destructive, because a destructive malacha, by definition, needs to also contribute to in a constructive manner. Most malachas are lichatchila, from the outset constructive. Cooking, baking, all those things are from the outset constructive. The counterintuitive malachas are the ones that are destructive. And the chiddush is no. Construction, which is about facilitating creation, that's also a malacha. So, Professor, I love your point, but my challenge to you, if you don't mind, is can we think of another malacha that's being done that's being done not for its purpose, but it creates and affects emotional well-being or calmness, and then we would have a good analogy, I think.
Well, for example, I can wash the dishes so that it will be more pleasant to drink kiddush from the cup or something like that. Okay, I can sweep the floor because it's ugly, and thus I would contribute to my happiness on Shabbos. I think that the examples of malacha, which might not be constructive, but the malachot that affect the mood of the person. This is what I see as a hiddush, that affecting the mood is considered in malacha.
Right. Well,
there are many examples of raising your spirits by doing something.
So generally speaking, on Shabbos, we do things to help a person be in a state of rest, menucha, but not prohibited acts. Professor, I guess what you're saying is we might think that doing an act not for its primary constructive purpose, maybe it would be permitted because all it's doing is allowing us to calm down. And now we're saying no.
Not a calm down. I'm taking the opposite of what the Gemara says. I'm talking about creating a feeling of happiness.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for elaborating.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi.
I think Dr. Hammer would agree with me. When a person is angry, if he would take the time to write down, why am I angry? That would be a very positive move.
Right.
And would probably calm his anger.
Okay.
So an example of a malacha that...
So hold on, I'm not sure. I think what you're asking is, hold on. So we're saying on Shabbos, don't smash your TV. The Gemara is going to ask, and I think this is what you're getting at. That's why are you saying, and since when is this a good thing to do on a weekday? It's kind of like Alan's question. So if I'm angry, is the Gemara telling me, yes, Alan, go smash your windshield, take a baseball bat and smash your windshield or something else? But I think that's the value of a punching bag. You can release your feelings of aggression, but without creating much damage. The worst damage will probably be to your hands.
As long as it's a non-human punching bag.
Yeah. So let's see the Gemara. I don't mean to cut you off, but I think the Gemara is going to get to exactly your point. And before that, Professor, again, I want to thank you for always having illuminating comments and questions. The Gemara asks, Uchahai Gavna Mishari, is a person allowed to do destruction in order to temper their anger? If you're allowed to do it, we'll call it constructive. It's prohibited even on a good day. I believe that's what we're saying over here. Let's see. But Tanya, the Brisa teaches as follows. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Aimer Mishum Rabbi Chilfel ben Agra, Rabbi Shimon Elazar taught, quoting Chilfel ben Agra, quoting Rabbi Shimon Yochanan ben Nuri, Hamekareya begada bechamasei, a person who tears his clothing out of anger. The Hameshaber Kela bechamasei, of a person smashes dishes in his anger. The Hamefazer ma'isa bechamasei, a person who stands in the park and throws money out the window or all around. His neighbors might like him, but Yehei beinecha ka'ovid avodah zar. You see a person doing this, and you should consider him to be something like avodah zara. Why? Shekach umnasei shel yetzer hara. This is how a person's evil inclination works. Hayoim omer lacha asekach. One day he tells you to do something silly, and then he gets you to go down a slippery slope, which is, I think, what the Gemara is trying to describe. Until he gets the person in such a toxic frame of mind and so accustomed to doing things that he otherwise would not be willing to do, until he tells him, Avod, Avod, Zara, this is a very famous teaching, especially in the works of Musar and Chassidus. The Yetzer Hara is clever. He doesn't wake up a perfect tzaddik one morning and say, hey, Rabbi Yid, you want to join the church? The person would never listen to such a Yetzer Hara. So he tells the guy to start listening to gospel music because it's beautiful. And then to start, I don't know, I'm just saying, he tries to get the person to go on a journey where he desensitizes him to ideas that were once not in his vocabulary. I'm not here to criticize anyone's music choices or whatever. I was just trying to think of a hypothetical. But the Yetzer Hara tries to slowly desensitize a person and get him more accustomed and comfortable to doing things that he otherwise would never do, until one day a person can find themselves far away from how they desire to see themselves and where they wish to see themselves. And this is on its own a very powerful, again, Musar kind of teaching about how, I think we call this slicing the salami. And I think it's used in the context of Putin's aggression, where he took Crimea and no one commented, and he took Georgia, no one commented, and he took Lugansk and whatever, no one commented. And then all of a sudden we're like, hey, how does this guy think it's acceptable to be bombing civilians in Ukraine? And like, yeah, because no one did anything. So I guess that might be an interesting mashal. So I think we call that slicing the salami. So the Yetzer Hara likes the slice the salami strategy. And that's why there's never a hill too small to die on in Judaism. When it comes to when it comes to a person's own internal development, a person should, or is advised based on this Gemara, to consider every struggle or every challenge potentially the beginning of a slippery slope. And that's, again, how the Gemara, I think that's what the Gemara is trying to tell us here. If anyone has any different perspectives, I welcome them. This is just my commentary.
Rabbi, the most dangerous step is it starts by saying it's okay, it's part of Judaism. That's the big...
Again?
The entry point today from the people who try to turn us away is this is okay, it's part of Judaism. They find a pasuk somewhere, they give it a different...
Well, listen, that's like the story of Adam and Chava, where Adam tells, and this is again where you shouldn't make chumras that don't exist. Maybe it's the counterpoint. Adam tells Chava not to touch the tree, and then she touches the tree, and she's already afagaing, and there is no consequence, and so she's more inclined to listen to the snake when it comes to eating. So I guess the idea is so there's two sides. A person should hold firm to their own personal morals, morals and values, but we don't need to seek to create. There's enough chumras and there's enough restrictions within Judaism that we don't need to necessarily introduce additional ones. I know this could be controversial, and everyone can use it in their own liking, to convey. Anyways, okay, that's it. Rashi.
But all this pertains to the person who destroys his own stuff that belongs to him, because if he breaks something that belongs to somebody else in his anger, then he gets the other guy angry.
Right. So what I believe is happening over here is we're really doing two things. He's saying breaking something is avodah zarah. And then the Gemara, our instinctive reaction is, hold on, I know what avodah zarah is, and it doesn't look like smashing a plate. So how are you equating smashing a plate to avodah zarah? So the Gemara says, yeah, well, you know what the Yitzhar does? First, he gets you to lose your temper and to do something that really will make you ashamed of yourself. And then while you're feeling down, he'll get you to do something else you don't want. I think we could use the same thing, the same analogy in a diet. For those that struggle with diets, so the first, how do you call it? The first food that you're not supposed to be eating, the first time you slip is the most dangerous for the diet, because the person, once they've stepped out of bounds, it's much harder to be back in line. And I think the same can be said about many disciplines. I believe the same thing is also about it, in the 12 steps, and people that are struggling for sobriety or for other kinds of addictions, where it's not just one, what do you call it? It's not just one indulgence. It could be devastating and cause a person to slide totally beyond where they want to be.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi.
To turn it positive, Rabbi Twersky writes over and over again that he learned from the 12 steps to be positive. Do one mitzvah at a time. Don't feel bad you can't do the whole thing.
Yeah, and the necessity of spirituality and accountability, etc., etc. It's a brilliant and very important process. All right. But again, I was just trying to explain to Alan what I believe the Gemara is saying over here. Is trying to say how anger, in a sense, is very human. It's very normal, and we all do it. And it's not unheard of for us to do something in anger that we don't want to do. But we have to consider that the reaction that we really are ashamed of and is counterproductive could be detrimental. Now, I don't think this means that when a person messes up or does one thing they don't want, they should say, okay, it's over. Now, that would be very not the message of the Gemara either. A person is human. We all make mistakes. We all slip. But we should do our best to change course ASAP, understanding that, we got to do tshuva. So it's careful. We we want to make strong, hard, extreme statements, and we want to be careful not to be conveying the wrong message. I'll tell you one other thing that I heard is, actually, you'll like this even more, I think. Why are we considering breaking stuff to be like avodah zarah? Simple. Just like praying in front of a statue is worthless, and making an offering to a statue is worthless, it's like throwing money in the street. You might as well just throw it out. You might as well just take your money and throw it out. You might as well just smash your stuff. It's the same purposeless, same useless, unproductive behavior. So that's another shot of why we're equating destroying dafka to avodah zarah. Amar Rav Oven, continuing along this same topic. Excuse me, Micra, what is the meaning of the verse? Don't have in you a foreign god. Don't bow to a strange deity. Ezo Kale Zar. What is a foreign god? How do you have bicha? Let's read this line again. Dr. Stamler, are you on with us? No. Don't have a foreign god. Bicha. What is we're what do you call it? Make an incision and put a statue or put an avodah zarah inside of ourselves? What does it mean? So Ezel Zar Sheyesh Begufei Shel Adam, since when does the human body have within it a foreign god. This is the evil inclination which is within us. Rashi b'cha, mashma b'kir b'cha. It sounds like it means inside of you. Shimhaya b'cha, if you'd have your Yetzer Hara in you, tishtach v'lekalnecha l'basayf. Allowing the Yetzer Hara foothold can eventually lead to very disappointing and upsetting places. So the Gemara answers a question that I think Rebel made to say, yeah, you're right. Anger, that's pointless, is prohibited in the Torah. You're not allowed to smash dishes or throw money, etc. But sometimes it's constructive. The ka'avid lemirma aim sign shebeisa. You do it to instill fear in the members of the household, to assert his dominance. A person needs to establish his role in the house. I mean, that's the most literal reading over here, but I suppose it also means to keep everyone behaving the way they ought to. Kihad Rav Yehuda, and indeed we find great sages of the Talmud who occasionally may have used, what's the word? They did certain things to portray and to establish or clarify something that's good or not good. Shalif mitzayivas matzviasa. He pulled off the seam of a garment. Rashi minabeged bechamasa laroisam shekoyes v'yigurmul fanav. You need to assert that he was angry and they should not continue doing what they're doing. So let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz's commentary, which is very much what we just said. In order to show that he's very angry, he tears or breaks objects, even though he is not angry. In that case, he maintains control of himself and is not in danger of succumbing to the evil inclination. So if a person does something out of anger, it means they're doing something while they're out of control. And once a person is doing things out of control, it can get worse and a person get into a spiral. But if a person's entirely in control and they're just putting on a show, as we discussed before we saw this in the Gemara, I was discussing the Rambam who quotes our Gemara. Rav Acha bar Yaakov tov armani teviri. Rav Acha bar Yaakov would break broken dishes. Smash broken dishes. Rav Sheshes Rami Leila Amse Moy Nine Oyve Hareshe. He threw fish brine at his help. Moinine Sir Shel Dogim Tanim, a little brine. Rab Abba Tovar Nichtima. Rab Abba broke the lid of his pitcher. So we have here records of folks that are upheld as upstanding model citizens who are steeped in practice that is based on the Talmudic instruction. They did not abstain from expressing anger, but the point was express the anger, don't feel the anger. You can put on a portrayal of how bad or dastardly or unacceptable behavior is if that's your role to play. But if you do it out of anger and losing control, it's not going to be strategic, it's not going to be effective, and that seems to be the strong point of our Gemara. Tosfos makes a nice point now. He says, okay, now we could use this as a paradigm to understand the Mishnah and the Brisa. We could say the Mishnah and the Brisa, who says you're chayiv and you're patur, could both be following Rabbi Yehuda. And the distinction would be, why are you doing the destruction? Are you doing it because you're angry, or are you doing it to portray a virtue? Doing construction out of anger is counterproductive. It's bad. It's not misaking. And you think you're going to feel better by breaking something? On the contrary, you're going to become a less disciplined person and more prone to future outbreaks. I don't know if this reflects contemporary the contemporary psychology and the understanding of how humans behave today, but that seems to be the message here. Giving in and allowing yourself to become out of control will not make you be a more disciplined person. So breaking a windshield is not going to make you a better person. In the moment, you may not break your friend's skull, and if that's necessary, then by all means break your windshield, not your friend's skull. Don't do anything that's going to harm another person. But ideally, you want to rein in your instinct to break anything. And if you need to convey a message, calm down and then go break it. That seems to be the message of our Gemara. But here Tosfos has an interesting way to understand a distinction between the Mishnah and the Brisa. We'd rather establish the Mishnah to say that he's doing destruction constructively than to say that the Mishnah is addressing an out of control person. Okay, that's a nice place. Folks, thoughts?
I'm very confused with this stuff.
All right, explain to me what you're confused. I mean, it is a little bit ambiguous, but explain to me what you're confused. Maybe we can work on it together.
Don't
It's not
get
that I
angry,
don't-
Alan. Don't get angry.
It's not that I don't understand it. It's just that what I can't perceive is that the whole purpose about Shabbos is to be calm, to think only of peaceable, nice things.
Alan, can I cut you off for a moment? Our Gemara basically is saying, don't break things on Shabbos ever. Generally speaking, you shouldn't break things, even on the weekday. On occasion, on rare occasion, there is a constructive method of breaking something to assert your dominance. Pardon me for saying that. I know that makes us uncomfortable. Or to establish and to communicate to people that are under your instruction that what they're doing is no good. There is a place, possibly, for being instructive, for putting on a show, an act. There is room for that within the Talmudic perspective. That's constructive, and even that type of destroying is prohibited on Shabbos. So one should never, the bottom line of our argument, one should never ever break something out of anger or a portrayal of anger, ever. Or I shouldn't say ever, I'm sorry, on Shabbos, ever. In the weekday, be very deliberate, calm yourself down first, and then if you need to make a point, you can do so. I'm thinking of another example. You know, the military, when it comes to training young recruits, there are some very harsh techniques and discipline that is used in the training of young recruits.
Boot camp.
Boot camp. There's emotional, psychological, physical beatings. They're forced to push their bodies and minds to beyond the limit of what they conceive to be possible. And sometimes the instructors convey great anger, disappointment, abusiveness. And so that's an example where ultimately a soldier that goes through this, again, I don't know this, I imagine, is a better soldier. And it's better for them to go through this time where they're kind of, it's communicated to them the necessity of how do you call it? Of following a chain of command and what do you call it? Being, what's the right word? Disciplined. And so there is constructive purpose under the right circumstances.
Rabbi?
Yes, doctor.
It's a very interesting topic. I mean, we could talk about the difference between in relationships with Hashem, with parents, with kids, between love or mitzvahs, love and fear. But the issue of acting as if is very important. Let's take the example when you tell a child who's making noise in shul, you know, I'm really disappointed. Why don't you stop that? Are you really angry? Okay, and you can say it like, you know, I'm really come on. Okay, so just that as an example, but you're doing it because you want to teach something, and you're teaching it out of this combination of love and fear, that respect that you assume that the child has for you and your feelings towards them. So I'm just saying this is very
Mandel. Here, one second.
Yeah.
On your tati? I think
Bernie.
I hope he doesn't yell at you know.
We should all thank you, doctor. And I think the other thing which I suppose you'll agree with me is that the human psychological makeup is not always identical. Harder times probably made, we're not hoping for harder times. Harder times made people to have a different psychological and emotional composition. And Baruch Hashem, the relative prosperity our current day presents has caused people to be softer in their emotional and psychological makeup. And I'm not saying good or bad, I'm just saying reality. And by extension, how we educate and discipline our children and what we do to those that are in our custody or education is certainly different. And so, I mean, I guess I gave an excuse for why today we were more soft and once they weren't. You might tell me that they were once wrong, and I'm willing to hear that discussion. The bottom line is, regardless of if in past times they were correct, in today's world, a lot of the harshness that was once used in education doesn't work. And so therefore, that's another thing to consider, why some of the things that are said here are hard for us to fathom. And conversely, they once maybe were a necessary part of, or at least were an integral part of how society educated its young ones. So again, I'm not intending to give a commentary about which is better or worse. My excuse was that, you know, harder circumstances gave less time for people to grow up, and they had to squeeze a lot into a shorter period of time, or whatever it was. But just to point out that obviously not all of the values of education and the way education worked back then would work today. And I think that's worth considering.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi.
You're taking this stuff right out of the headlines. There's a big controversy in Israel today about the difficult training. Nebuch soldiers were injured and even died. And there's a whole movement to take a look at it. And it's also paralleled in sports, where they make the young kids in the heat train, and sometimes, God forbid, you know, there's tragedies. So there's a push to try and find a better way, even though they may not be as hardened as the other way would produce.
I hear you. And then the other side of the coin, especially we're talking about Israel, is that they need to be very prepared for, God forbid, any kind of, you know, encounter. And so I understand the two sides of the coin. It's not an easy question. Also realize the young boys and girls in the Tzahal are children. They are everyone's children.
Right.
So,
yeah, but Bernie, what's
it's
interesting?
not. We can't be callous and say, "Oh yeah, let them work harder," or "Oh yeah, abuse them." No, these are everyone's children. So this is really a tough.
No, but this is only relatively new, Bernie. Nobody asked that question 10 years ago.
Yeah. Listen, everything. All of the conversations bleed into one another, and you know, for better or for worse. I want to just show you the Rambam here. In Hilchos Deis, he describes how a person should temper and manage their emotions. And he says, generally, a person should be balanced. They shouldn't be entirely here. There are certain characteristics that a person should stay to the extreme. To stay very far away. And they are Goiva Lev, haughtiness. Ideally, a person should not be so self-consumed. A person should be very humble. Similarly, it says, a person who is very haughty and full of themselves, it's like they're denying Hashem, and etc., etc. Similarly, anger. Anger is a very detrimental midah. And again, to point out, we are all born with different balances of, you know, propensity to anger, etc. And so this is not a criticism of our natural composition and character. It's just those that are more inclined to anger have to work harder, and it's not easy. A person should attempt to stay as far as possible from anger. A person should train themselves to not get angry, even something that anger is warranted. And here's the argument. If a person is tasked with educating children or running a household which needs to have discipline, or he's a community leader who part of his job is to check, I think that's a modern word, he has to guide and make sure people are following appropriate ways. He needs to, in a disciplinary state, portray anger. Yara atmai bifnehem shu koyes. Show in their presence as if he is angry. Kedei layasrim, so they should be fearful. V'tia datam yesheves beino devin atmai, but he himself should be entirely in control. Adam shu medame koyes v'shas kasei ve'enoi koyes. Person that's putting on a show, portraying anger, but in truth, what's going on inside is not anger. Indeed, our sages say, and this is our Gemara that we're quoting. Amru chachamim harishayim, our Gemara. Anger is akin to avodah zarah. And then he goes on and says, if you get anger, your wisdom can depart. A prophet loses his prophetic capacity. And a person who's perpetually angry, he says a very powerful line. This is not a way to live. What a miserable way to live. And a person should attempt. Not easy. Some people need anger management. Other people are naturally born without, a propensity. You're not prone to being angry. But then again, everyone is born with strengths and weaknesses and mountains to scale. Be shamed, don't shame others. Hear someone offend them, they don't respond, etc., etc. So this is a very demanding Rambam, based in part on our Gemara. I think it's a powerful Rambam, and it comes to mind on occasion. I try to consider it at least. Easier said than done, but and so this is the Gemara little segment about anger. Before we move on, hold on. No, this we did yesterday. All right, so this is the Gemara again. We this is a nice section here. Again, agree with it or not, but I think this is a very important little micro section on the subject of anger, if it's constructive ever and how. I think it's one of those. It should be essential reading. All right, now let's continue talking some Agadic teachings on the subject of mourning. Okay. Any comments or thoughts before we just continue a little more?
Yeah, it reminds me of the it's not a saying, but I don't know where it came from. That the best way to understand the person's nature, personality, or character is, Picasso, Picasso, Picoso. I'm not sure in that order, but I put it in that order.
Casso,
Kiso, in his anger, and Kiso in his pocket, and Koso in his drinking, in his, So
you're saying you could tell a lot about a person when they're angry. They reveal a lot about themselves.
When they're angry, when they get drunk, okay, and when they're asked to give money or in monetary areas, and then necessary to give money.
There are a few different pirushim. It could also be, I think what you're saying is how they prioritize their spending. You see what's important to them, how they spend. You can also see how a person treats the people in their lives, their family.
Right. Okay.
So I think there's different, but the point is, yes, the three chaf samachs, kis, kas, and kos are all very, and some people, unfortunately, they say l'chaim, and a beast emerges that no one recognizes. And
well, I think in general, in terms of acting, as if we teach in our society to say things that we don't fully believe in, with emotions that we don't fully feel necessarily.
Like, thank you.
And that's just part of our way here. For example, unfortunately, somebody passes away. It's typical not just to say what we say in Hebrew, which is very good because it's there for you and it has certain meaning. But I'm so sorry to hear. I was so, and it doesn't matter. I mean, people obviously they should be sincere and should, but we know that much of the time that's not true. But you're saying it, and you don't feel like you're lying. Maybe at that moment, maybe you feel it, but maybe you don't. I mean, you get. I'm just using that as an example. Right. But there are many other examples also, and maybe from that sometimes we teach children to be less than fully sincere about what they say, and even about their emotions about something.
Interesting. And other societies have different relationships with the expressions they say. So you have certain societies that are even, I'd say, more disingenuous than a Jewish kid growing up in Miami Beach or in Teaneck or Brooklyn.
Right.
And then you might have someone that, other side, which is even more proper. And sometimes proper is at the cost of authentic. And then you have other societies that are, Baruch Hashem, much more authentic. Maybe we'll say folks of our beloved country, Israel, or I think people that come from, or maybe the former Soviet Union. I think there's more of a instinct to be authentic and honest in communication. It's an interesting, observation. I need to just add one comment, a little bit of a pet peeve, although I understand it. Lo aleinu, when a person passes and there's a posting on a group, the instinct, you'll notice everyone types, and we actually mentioned this recently, Baruch Dayan MS or Baruch Dayan HaMS, BDE, BDH, and it's usually a reaction of shock and upsetness, and we feel that it's appropriate to say Baruch Dayan MS or BDE because that is what's said, and so by extension, it conveys internally when we're responding as such. We're not really trying to just say, yeah, Baruch Dayan MS, blessed is the true judge. We're expressing our shock and disappointment. However, I remember when my mother passed away, and I got a lot of messages, of just like friends sending me a 3-letter acronym, BDE, or sometimes they'll send me or sometimes spell check would change it. So a bunch of people sent me BED, BED. So, or they were BDE, and it made me then realize that they mean to convey that they're sorry, they're checking in, they're being connected, and it's wonderful. But I always try when responding loyally when I hear these things with more than just BDE, even if it's I'm sorry, and that's because the word bar, to me, Baruch Dayan HaMS, that's what the person that's what the mourner says. That's how the mourner has to respond. But I feel personally, I'm not saying everyone has, that you have to respond with something more than an acronym that doesn't really convey what you're trying to convey. You're trying to convey that you're sorry, or you feel, or you're in shock, or you're crying with them. Write that. Writing BDE, it comes from a loving and caring good place, and better that than nothing. But
better Hamakom is better.
Rabbi.
Hamakom Menachem is better.
Yeah. Rabbi
Bernie just touched on one of my pet peeves with children, and that is to make threats that you don't really believe. Like a kid will scratch the car, you're never getting the car again. Because at the end of the day, that takes away that whole, what do you want to call it, the method or whatever. I used to have make very few rules and stick to them.
Yeah, better have few rules and keep them than many rules. And because then the kids or whoever know that when you say something, you actually mean it. Yeah. All right, let's do 2 more lines. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take the.
No.
Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi taught along the subject. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Mishum Bar Kappa. Kol Amoyre Demais Al Adam Kasher. This is similar to what we said before. A person who sincerely cries for an upright person. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Soifron Umanichan Beveis Ginazav. Hashem counts them and stores them in his treasure house. Shenemar Noidi Safarta Ata Sima Dimasi Benoidecha Haloi Besifra Secha. You have counted my wanderings, put my tears into your bottle. Are they not in your books? Have you ever heard a person talk about putting tears in a bottle? They may be alluding to Tehillim, but here we also have the tears are recorded in Hashem's book. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Similarly, Rav Yehuda Amar Rav says, a person who is lazy, who doesn't properly mourn or give a hesped to a chacham, roy lekayver b'chayav, the person, something bad. He should be buried in whose lifetime? Oh no, buried alive. I'm sorry?
Starting to get serious.
Pretty serious. So I guess we'll end over here. A righteous, good person passes on. We should mourn them. We should honor them. And the Gemara is giving us a very emphatic and vigorous teaching that it's necessary to do so. And tomorrow we'll continue a little more of this, and then we'll go on to the next Gemara. I hope you found today's Gemara interesting. I did. And again, davening for good news for the Chabura, their households, the world over. And again, a special tefillah for those Jews that are trying to escape or are seeking cover, that they should be safe and sound, and whatever, all evil should be removed with the arrival of Mashiach Tzidkenu ASAP. Have a wonderful day, Chumash. And the link. And then in just a moment, Chumash will resume with Rabbi Shalom Ber. Again, thank you all for being here, for putting up with my soapboxing over here. Have a great day.
It's a good thing you didn't hear my story when I was angry.
You'll share it tomorrow, first thing.
I can let you in on a secret that Alan once owned a gun. We'll take it from there.
All righty. Have a wonderful day.
And has a pilot's license. Take it, put those two together.
You don't have to worry about burying him alive.